All right. This is Openstax U.S. History, Chapter 10, Section 2, The Rise of American Democracy. So let us recall that from last section in the election of 1824, the candidates for President Andrew Jackson, Henry Clay, and John Quincy Adams, that neither one of them won a majority of the electoral votes. Therefore, it went to the House of Representatives, where Henry Clay and John Adams combined their votes together, to make John Quincy Adams the next president of the United States. This was referred to as the corrupt bargain. This was essentially, as Jackson supporters put it, Jackson getting cheated out of the presidency. This image here on the right depicts that. Here is Henry Clay, and he is on top of Andrew Jackson, sewing his mouth shut. In other words, that the people's voice, because Jackson was a president of the people, would not be heard. This set up an election 4 years later, the election of 1828, where Jackson supporters were very much ready to make Andrew Jackson the next president of the United States, cried foul play with the corrupt bargain. And Jackson and his supporters were much more organized this time. They created a brand new political party around Andrew Jackson. That is the Democratic Party. And this time there was a party with the name, an organization, and in 1828, Jackson won that election and became president of the United States. Like I mentioned last section, some of the slogans that really represent the division between kind of the old elite classes, that old aristocracy, and the new politics of the masses. Don't vote for Adams who can write. Instead, vote for Jackson who can fight, right? We want a fighter and not an intellectual. Jackson himself, his support came from much of the common class who viewed Jackson as their champion. They were poised against the corrupt elite. So this was very much sort of a, we might just say common versus elite classes. And a lot of the individuals in the United States had believed for a long time that the elite was corrupt. You can even point back to things like the Panic of 1819 and things like the American system. Because really, when you look at things like the American system, recall that the system is laws that are passed by the government to improve internal, investments, businesses, industries, whatever it may be. If you think of it in a certain sense, the American system kind of combines the interests of politics, of banks, and of business. And in a lot of ways, this is sort of an unholy alliance between the elite interests of the United States. They're all looking out for each other with the American system, right? Tariffs protect the businesses. The Second National Bank protects the banks. And when the Panic of 1819 set in, yes, it affected all these groups, but it affected sort of the common class the most. So, politicians, bankers, and businessmen, they can be up to no good. They can fill each other's fill each other's pockets with money. But when the economy crashes, who gets stuck left with the bill? And that is the common class. And now you add on top of that the fact that this corrupt bargain occurred. That only confirmed really what all Americans were thinking at the time, and that was politics is corrupt, and we need to open it up to the masses. Jackson and his supporters called him Old Hickory. This was Jackson's nickname. And again, Jackson was a part of the new Democratic Party, a new party. Once Jackson got into office, he tended to ruffle some feathers between the old established politicians and kind of the new guard that was coming in from his home state of Tennessee. He fired much of the older positions that were in office and ended up hiring new people. Rotation in office, we might describe this as the replacing. We'll just call them Washington officials. Right, so sort of out with the old and in with the new. Jackson also staffed his government via the spoils system, that is to reward loyalty. So again, don't find the best person for the job. Find the person who is the most loyal to you, who has your back. And, there was also some drama which occurred at the White House that really represented this difference between kind of the old elite guard and Jackson's new politics. And it surrounded Peggy O'Neill, sometimes called the Petticoat Affair. Margaret Peggy O'Neill had previously been married. And again, we'll just simplify this to kind of make it more clear and we'll call it an old, right, quote unquote, old elite. We'll say we'll just say politician. Politician. And she ended up having an affair. Had affair and married, we'll say, a quote unquote new Jackson politician, right? Someone that was sort of part of the new guard, so to speak. And this affair tended to divide people in Washington, including Adam Jackson's own cabinet. Peggy O'Neill's old husband, you might say, much of the old elite, the established elite, ended up committing suicide. She very quickly married this new politician that was a part of Jackson's crew, and it really isolated some of the old established politicians, namely John C. Calhoun, who was Jackson's vice president. I think he eventually actually resigned from that position, went back to South Carolina, and sort of divided Washington, D.C. in that way. Instead, Jackson did not rely upon some of the more established and experienced members in D.C. Instead, he sort of just relied on those who were loyal to him. We call this the kitchen cabinet. Washington and his close inner circle is called the cabinet. Well, out with the old cabinet, in with the kitchen cabinet. We might just call this the informal circle of advisors to Jackson. And among them was Martin Van Buren, who was responsible for creating this new modern appeal to the masses in terms of political systems up in New York, and eventually would serve as Andrew Jackson's second vice president.